My name is Johann Freeberg, and this is a video displaying and explaining 13 of my best works created over the past 2 years. Industry was a sculpture made completely from aluminum wire, a steel nut, and a shaped stone. It was my first independent project assigned in my Art 2 class in 10th grade, March 2011. It was sculpted from 214-inch wires that I hammered straight, compiled into a bundle, and then formed into a tree. Each wire was shaped with a patterned hammer to create a thin leaf-like texture. A nut and wire rope was added to give a hint to the concept behind the piece, which was the play between man-made industrial materials and an organic natural scene. The project was based on research done on Mark Gullum, a fine artist and a master of wire trees. I contacted him and he explained his process to me, and from that knowledge I created this sculpture. Breaking free is an assigned project I finished in January of 2011. The Art 2 class took a trip to the local thrift shop and bought interesting shoes each student wanted to sculpt from wire. We each came up with the story we wanted to portray through our shoes. My story was about this red hot wedge was about a stripper trying to free herself from her past. After hitting rock bottom, she left in the night, leaving only her shoe behind. The piece was created completely from aluminum wire and wire mesh. Some of the mesh was spray painted red to give color to the piece. The sculpture depicts a shoe torn from a foot, with the frayed strap still extending outward. This project originally got me interested in wire, which I have continued to utilize as a media for various projects in the past 2 years. The concept behind newspaper was to give ordinary, usually discarded materials life. I created an extremely boxy, basic, cat-like structure from cardboard that I attached ripped pieces of newspaper to with hot glue. Personally, I was amazed at how many pieces I could fit onto the sculpture. Progress was slow, but eventually I covered the entire 7 by 10 by 14-inch surface. It was interesting to see how the paper could get a furry texture to the piece, and how I could get all the newspaper fur to face in a single direction. The work ended up even being soft to touch, which enabled this piece to not only be visual, but also tactile, enhancing the concept of giving ordinary materials life. The cautious eyes and tilted ears give the animal a sense of emotion that I found very successful. Even my own pet at home believes this little guy is alive. Fire Swept is a piece about standing one's ground in a time of delusion and ambiguity. New images are being thrown at us by media every second of the day, and it is important not to be swayed by them without reason. This piece depicts a tree being swept by a storm so harsh it scorches the ground. Despite branches blowing in the wind, the roots of the tree stay fixed and protect the ground beneath them. Under the base of the tree, the wood remains untouched while surrounded by charcoal and ash. This work was created from a 60-foot copper telephone cable that I cut into meter-long sections, each of which I straightened. I then separated and straightened meter-long pieces of cable into its 7 individual wires and bundled them into the trunk, then shaped the tree in its roots. I varnished the wood, sharpened the end of each root, and hammered them into the base. This piece here was inspired by a first-year architecture project by a graduate of my high school, and she was doing that in college, and my teacher discovered it and suggested that I did something similar. Using my own body as a stencil, I measured myself from two perpendicular angles, and glued them together. And then I filled the areas between them with cross sections that I then shaped to portray the contour of my body. The concept behind the piece goes something like this. In an age of social networking and new technology, we are constantly trying to categorize our lives and fit ourselves and others into boxes. Boxed In is a piece about trying to break free from these categorizations and displays a figure physically struggling with this mental battle. This piece captures him mid-transformation. No longer human, he is turning into an inanimate object. A simple cardboard box to be filed away with the rest. On a side note, I apologize for these unprofessional pictures of this piece. My studio space is a little limited for this massive sculpture. In April 2012, Kladoishi, a local fine artist here in Hawaii who works with copper and solder, came to our school to host a small workshop. During that time, he taught the class how to work with copper and solder as a medium, and I created this lizard based off his techniques. This piece is functional art and sports a hook on the underside from which the sculpture can be hung. When on the wall, the tail functions as a hook where one can hang a key or a piece of clothing or anything else that would seem fitting, actually. The piece is titled Bashful because of the look the lizard gives as it turns and glances behind itself at the viewer. Mark Brown is a Hawaiian plein air artist who is local to the islands and came this October 2012 to teach our class how to paint from observation. He only paints from life, actually, and many of his works are moments from the outdoors here on Oahu. We have a school rooster named Murphy, and when we were outside painting around the campus, Murphy decided to lay in the sun and pose for me, obviously wanting a portrait of himself. So naturally, I obliged, and this is what I came up with. I really enjoyed the experience of the workshop, and it helped me with my drawing and painting from life skills tremendously. This self-portrait was an assigned project, and the main concept behind it was that it was supposed to be symbolic of our personalities. I, however, just wanted to draft a house, so I related it to some of my architecture, or to my love of architecture, and simply drew myself in front of a home by Charles Cunefe, who works in Aspen, Colorado. I went there this spring and found one of his houses and really fell in love with it. I enjoyed drawing the home in the background, but I don't really think I look like me in the portrait, and for that reason this piece is not one of my favorites, despite how it displays my technical skills. This summer I attended a Cal Poly architecture career workshop, and this was the first project we were assigned. We were directed to make a perfect cube from the template provided, and I complied, but I decided to draw my own lines and create a cube using the paper on which the template was printed, but not using the printed lines themselves. This created an interesting effect, and when the viewer picked up the piece, it attracted their interest and provoked them to turn the piece around and follow the lines around the cube. This project was then expanded to create a sculpture linking two cubes together, one orange and one gray, and this is the final piece I made, and it depicts kind of the linkage between the two colors. This here is another project done at Cal Poly this summer, and the concept behind it was kind of like we were supposed to depict the music we were listening to at the time, and the entire student body was basically divided into partners, put into a massive room, and then sent to work building hanging sculptures while listening to abnormal loud music. My partner and I decided that there were repetition in the songs, so we created a piece that demonstrated that idea. As you can see in these pictures, it was kind of a repetition with variation theme. One of the most frustrating parts, however, was forming the innermost triangular prism, because it was made entirely of pasta and rubber bands, and the strands of pasta kept breaking. It was a fun experience, though, working with weird materials like this. This was a project done again at Cal Poly. Our assignment was to create a structure that spanned 3 of the stairs on a particular part of the campus in an interesting way. I knew triangles could be used in many different shapes, to create many different shapes, I guess, and I created the structure from triangles. It was a fun study on space and how simple shapes could be repeated to create interesting forms. The triangles I created casted some really interesting shadows too. Overall, this was one of my favorite projects at the Cal Poly workshop, and I wish I could have taken it back to Hawaii with me, but it was a little too big to fit in my suitcase. This project was a Cal Poly study on how light falls on Earth during the year. We were given a layout of a landscape and asked to install a lap pool, a hot tub, and a seating area that were lit or shaded during different seasons. And the project had a diagram attached to it with a pin sticking out. And when the shadow of the pin fell on the corresponding markings on the chart for different specific days and parts of the year, the shadows for that day would be simulated in the work. And we used this to see how light would fall on our structure during the year.